Hi, I just want to take a moment before I actually start in on my expert tips to acknowledge and comment on people that have already spoken. Uniformly, they've given really, really good advice. I have been down the road from self-funded companies to angel-funded companies to VC funding, having been a founder of a number of companies, managing separate finances are things that are important. As an expert witness on in a number of cases, the legal side of stuff that Scott talked about, there's probably a lot more he could regale you with. and you know, Daniel brought up some really good points, as did not. So let me first just make a disclaimer here. I'm a technology guy. I've been on that side of things, but when I was asked to do some expert tips, I figured I would stick with what I know. And since you're doing augmented reality and virtual reality products, they're necessarily technology products. So I'm going to talk a little bit, my tips are involved in product management, in running the ship from a technological and design point of view. So you'll have two Bibles. You should have two Bibles. If you don't, you better get on it. You need an application design document, and you need a technical design document. You know, the more fleshed out they are, the better, but it's important to have just the basic points. And, you know, I can go on and you know, talk about the specifics of it, but we don't have time. What I will say is treat these as living documents. Whether one person writes them down to begin with and is in charge of making all updates to them, or whether you put them, as I would recommend, on a wiki, and all the members can, you know, edit with one person moderating, these will change. Your product's going to go through phases. You're going to find things out about what you're working on that were not in your original plan. And you've got to be flexible enough and keep everybody on the same page. Your application design document should lay out the vision for the final product, and the technical design document should lay out the overall design. Note the technical risks and how you're going to address those technical risks. The next thing I'm going to talk about is optimization. Don't put optimization of your product off to the last minute. I've seen many products sunk this way. This should be a continual, as Daniel talked about, iterative process. You have to be proactive here. Nothing hurts any product, any application you're making worse than if it has poor performance. So be sure that your technical design document defines your minimum platform requirement, and also while you're working on it, you have to make sure that you can execute fast enough on that minimum platform. But when you're picking your minimum platform, make sure that that is not an unreasonable requirement for your target audience. Don't, you know, define a minimum platform that your target audience can't afford or will not have. Another thing that people really generally don't like to work on is the user interface and user experience. It's critical. It's not sexy to work on it. You want to work on what's the guts of the product, but it's so easy to ruin a great product by not providing an elegant and intuitive interface and a user experience. If your product requires priest-level knowledge in order to use it, you have failed. I'm sorry, if you're going out to the consumer, you have failed if you require someone to read a 100-page manual to figure out how to use your product. They should be able to play around with it without hurting anything and figure out how it works. Think about using tools like Balsamic to mock up your interface to find out if what you're thinking about is actually going to function before you commit the resources, and it's going to cost you resources to develop a good user experience and user interface. So a lot of this stuff you probably all know, and I'm just trying to drive it home because, you know, we didn't learn all this stuff. We didn't know all this stuff starting out. It's something that we learned over time. And so this one is maybe the most obvious of all. Use version control system. Use it religiously. Source control is content control. And you can use it for your art, for your audio, for any piece of data that is committed to bits and bytes. Settle on a version control very early on and be religious about using it. Make sure everybody is on the same page with how you will use it. And same thing goes for backup. Make sure you're doing backups both on-site and off-site, and that this is as painless a process for everyone as possible. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is testing, which Daniel talked about a little bit, but more from a web-based as opposed to a standalone application point of view. If you're running a standalone application point of view, you typically can't just glean data straight from your product unless you build in telemetry. So think about that early on. What data can you collect from the user experience that you can either, if it's an online thing, you can upload it to your server and look at it later. You also should settle on a bug tracking system very early on. Make sure everyone is conversant with it. Something like, it can be as simple as Bugzilla. There are a number of really good systems out there. They all work well if you use them. And if you use them properly, you're bringing the reports that they generate to your Scrum meetings. And you're coming out of that Scrum meeting with a plan. And part of the plan that you should have in the TDD and the ADD is a test plan. I should have mentioned this early up, but I didn't. You have to plan when you're going to start testing, whether it's with your friends, whether you're going to do focus testing, which can be great, but make sure you're testing your target demographic, because otherwise it's not going to be anything. Test early and test often. So that's basically what I have to say as in addition to echoing everything you've heard from everybody else, because I think you got a lot of really good advice from these other gentlemen who've spoken so far. So. Any questions?
Questions?
Yeah. I was wondering if in the early days, when you were starting out in gaming, if there was a concern about monetization and there being a demand for it as a product at all. We have that problem now in VR of chicken or egg of content and users, and I was wondering if you faced that.
It was when I started out, it was in the Atari coin-operated games group, the arcade games. So monetization was the quarter that went in. And it was the number of quarters, and so a lot of our telemetry, if you will, was the game was collecting data on, exactly what people were doing during the game so we could follow that. Later, towards the end of my career, very recently, of course, monetization of a product that you can download for free becomes a huge issue. And to be honest with you, if you concentrate on the user experience and get something that the person is going to like, the monetization will take care of it. There's dozens of different ways you can go to monetize your product. I'm not an expert on them all. There are ways to determine the best way to monetize, but I think if you really concentrate on just making a compelling product, the monetization is something that you can bring in experts to help you with, and it will take care of itself. Yeah?
So you've seen a lot of generations of sort of both arcade and consumer hardware kind of come and go, and I'm sure you've seen like a lot of stuff just kind of fall on its face as well. It should have been the next big thing. Like, there's been a lot of waves of VR and even AR in the past. What's your feeling about like the current hype? Like, how much of it is hype and how much of it seems to be grounded in like what's actually going to happen?
I honestly think that the technology has come far enough that VR and AR, to a certain extent, are going to become, a big factor in the entertainment industry. I know a number of you people are not doing entertainment, but this is what I know. So I can only really speak about entertainment. Everything else is, my opinion, is worth no more than anybody else's here. But I really do think that, we experimented with stereo displays way back in the early days when I was working on Battlezone. We fashioned a mechanical device that would have two shutters in front of an eyepiece you look through, and it would it would send a signal to let us know which side which eye we were looking at, and so we actually had stereo way back when, stereo vision. Of course, you couldn't turn around and look within the room, and there were things we tried to do that kind of stuff. So it's been a long time getting to here, and I think this is really a place where it's going to. Just from what I'm seeing, it's going to start to take off very soon. You're seeing everybody and their brother coming out with new VR devices. And of course, as you know, it's content that's going to drive this. I've seen a number of things out there that are just poised, waiting to jump on the VR bandwagon. how good that content is going to determine how quickly it takes off, but I think it's going to take off. Yeah.
So when we came up with the idea, we were really worried about our technology side, and we felt like we needed a technology co-founder, and started talking to a lot of different people, entrepreneurs, and people in like bigger companies, and like, you know, head of tech engineering and whatnot. And we kept hearing that what we needed a lot of, because we also have a non-VR component, we use like more of a VR technology and like how to deliver the experience and navigate people more than like just the actual like content for VR. And we were told that there are a lot of like, you know, white label services that we could use. There are like, and essentially at the end of the day, they're like, technology is a commodity, focus on the rest of the stuff, and when the time comes, you can hire the right person. So, I mean, I feel like we're becoming closer to that. I just wanted to hear maybe some guidance that you have as like how to get that first tech person and in what capacity to bring them on so early on. And that's one question. One advice we were given was like to start working with the dev shop and then maybe later on kind of bring your tech person and, you know, bring everything in-house. So just wanted to hear some advice on that.
Well, finding a good person in VR, right now, most of the good people working in VR, they're taken up. I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. There are a number of people who are really good graphics people, and that's my background, by the way, who understand VR and just haven't gone into that area yet. And that's probably where you're going to be, you know, most able to find someone. My advice in that regard is to, you know, network. That's going to be the best thing you can do. Attend conferences like the Game Developers Conference in March, E3 in May, and speak to developers. And maybe you can find people that way. My advice as far as when to bring that person on, if you can bring them on in an advisory role from early on, with a plan towards bringing them on as a more active member further on, that's going to probably be your best bet, because you're not going to develop something that they're not going to want to get further involved in. So, thank you.
Thank you.